Sam Brannan made $36,000 in 9 weeks selling shovels. He never staked a claim. By 1854, California's 6 largest flour mills were processing 585 barrels per day at prices 25 times higher than East Coast rates. Miners who found gold made $8 to $6 per day when they struck it rich, barely enough to cover inflated food costs. Merchants who sold flour cleared $5,000 per day without touching a pan. Between 1849 and 1860, California miners extracted $550 million in gold. During that same period, wheat farmers and flour millers generated comparable fortunes selling bread to the prospectors. The difference? Miners risked everything, and most went home broke. Millers risked capital, built infrastructure, and created generational wealth. The California gold rush wasn't won with pickaxes. It was won with flour mills, general stores, and the merchant class that understood a simple truth. In a resource boom, sell to the prospectors. Never be won. January 24, 1848. James Marshall found gold flakes in the tail race of John Sutter's sawmill near Coloma, California. He showed them to Sutter, who confirmed the find using nitric acid and a Philadelphia encyclopedia. They tried to keep it quiet. Within 3 months, word reached San Francisco anyway. On May 12, 1848, a Mormon merchant named Samuel Brannan walked through Portsmouth Square waving a quinine bottle filled with gold dust. He shouted, "Gold, gold from the American River." San Francisco emptied. By June, 3/4 of the male population had abandoned the city for the foothills, but Brannan didn't follow them. He'd spent the previous week buying every shovel, pickaxe, and mining pan in San Francisco and Sacramento. Then he stocked his store at Sutter's Fort, the only supply point between the gold fields and civilization. When the rush began, Brannan was ready. Flour sold for 2 cents per pound in New York. Brannan charged 14 cents per pound in Sacramento. At remote mining camps like Bidwell's Bar, flour hit 50 cents per pound. That's a 2,500% markup. A standard barrel contained 196 pounds. At Bidwell's Bar prices, 1 barrel of flour sold for $98. A year earlier, that same barrel wholesaled for $4 in St. Louis. Brannan's store grossed $5,000 per day during peak season. In $2005, that's $120,000 daily. In contemporary purchasing power, Brannan moved goods equivalent to $600,000 per day by 2025 standards. He became California's first millionaire within 18 months. He never panned for gold. He sold supplies, speculated in Sacramento real estate when it was still a muddy river landing, and lobbied for commercial banking laws. By 1850, Brannan owned more property in California than any other individual. The miners who made him rich. Most returned home with less money than they'd brought. The arithmetic explained everything. In 1849, gold sold for $20.67 per troy ounce. A successful miner finding half an ounce per day earned $10.35. That sounds profitable until you itemize. Costs. A dinner at San Francisco's Parker House Hotel cost $8 to $12. A single egg sold for $1. Boots cost $2,000 in some accounts, likely inflated stories, but leather goods routinely ran $50 to $100. A basic miner's kit included a pan, $15, shovel, $10, pickaxe, $10, tent, $50, blankets, $20. Basic provisions for a month, $80. Total startup cost, $185. That's 18 days of successful mining before breaking even, assuming half an ounce per day. Most miners didn't find half an ounce per day. The early arrivals in 1848 cleaned out surface deposits quickly. By the time the 49ers reached California in late 1849 and throughout 1850, placer gold required more work for smaller yields. Competition intensified. Miners worked claims that produced $3 to $8 per day in gold, barely covering food and supplies at inflated prices. Meanwhile, merchants calculated profit on every transaction. Flour provides the clearest example. A 196-pound barrel cost $4 wholesale in St. Louis in 1848. Shipping by sea around Cape Horn added $2 per barrel. Transport from San Francisco to Sacramento added another $1. Total landed cost in Sacramento, $7 per barrel. Brannan sold that barrel for $27.44 at 14 cents per pound. Gross profit, $20.44 per barrel. Net profit after overhead, approximately $8 per barrel. Brannan's store moved 50 barrels per day during rush periods. That's $900 daily profit on flour alone. Add tools, clothing, hardware, whiskey, tobacco, and other provisions. The $5,000 daily gross revenue wasn't exaggeration. It was arithmetic. The pattern repeated across California's merchant class. Levi Strauss arrived in San Francisco in 1853 with bolts of canvas intended for tents. When he discovered miners needed durable pants, he partnered with tailor Jacob Davis to produce riveted denim work pants. They couldn't manufacture them fast enough. Strauss never minded. He built an empire selling clothes to people digging holes. John Studebaker worked as a wheelbarrow maker in Placerville during the gold rush. He saved his wages and returned to Indiana, where he built a wagon company that eventually produced automobiles. He never searched for gold. He built equipment for people who did. The real fortunes, though, came from agriculture. When the gold rush began in 1848, California imported virtually all its food. The local population of 14,000 couldn't support significant farming. Suddenly, 300,000 people arrived in 4 years. They needed to eat. Food prices exploded. In 1849, potatoes sold for $1 per pound. Onions brought $2 per pound. A farmer selling onions that year made the equivalent of $160,000 in 2005 dollars. Wheat was more valuable than gold by weight when flour prices hit 50 cents per pound. California's agricultural transformation began in 1852. The same year, gold production peaked at 81 million. That timing surprised everyone. In 1851, San Francisco's leading newspaper editorialized that it may be some years or the state shall produce sufficient breadstuffs for home consumption. They were wrong by 3 years. By 1854, California produced a wheat surplus and began exporting to Australia, Hawaii, and Pacific markets. By 1860, California shipped wheat to Britain, 14,000 miles across 2 oceans. What made this possible? The gold rush created infrastructure, capital, and markets simultaneously. Merchants who'd grown rich selling overpriced supplies invested profits in land and mills. Labor costs in California ran $4 to $6 per day, 3 to 5 times Midwest rates, but wheat farmers solved the labor problem through mechanization and exploitation of Native American labor. They purchased the newest gang plows, combined harvesters, and threshing equipment. They operated bonanza farms spanning thousands of acres, and they employed indigenous workers at fraction of white wages. The combination produced wheat competitive with Midwest prices, despite higher labor costs. By 1854, Sacramento alone operated 6 flour mills producing 585 barrels per day. That's 114 times 60 pounds of flour daily from one city. At 14 cents per pound, Sacramento mills generated $16,052 daily revenue. Yearly gross, $5.8 million. Compare that to gold mining. In 1854, California gold production totaled approximately $60 million. But that represents the gross extraction by perhaps 100,000 miners working full-time. Average gross per miner, $600 annually. After equipment, provisions, and claim fees, the average miner netted perhaps $200 to $400 per year. A flour mill owner in Sacramento, employing 30 workers, grossed nearly $1 million annually. Net profit after expenses, $200,000 to $300,000. One mill owner with 30 employees generated more profit than 500 miners working full-time. The wealth concentration was obscene. Between 1848 and 1852, California gold production totaled $207 million. That wealth dispersed among 300,000 prospectors and the businesses supplying them. The prospectors kept perhaps $80 million after costs. Merchants and service providers captured $127 million. Of that $127 million, the top 1,000 merchants probably controlled $90 million. Sam Brannan alone accumulated at least $6 million by 1860. That's equivalent to 2,900 successful miners earning $200 net profit per year for 10 years. The infrastructure investments compounded wealth. Brannan used store profits to buy Sacramento real estate at $50 per lot in 1849. By 1852, those lots sold for $5,000. He invested in flour mills, banks, and California's first railroad from Sacramento to Folsom. The railroad cost $1.5 million to build. It generated freight revenue of $400,000 annually. Brannan's share, $60,000 per year without physical labor. Meanwhile, miners worked dawn to dusk in cold streams hoping to find enough gold to buy dinner. The pattern extended beyond California. When gold was discovered in Australia in 1851, California merchants and farmers found new markets. Australian prospectors needed food. California shipped wheat and flour across the Pacific. Between 1852 and 1856, California exported millions of bushels to Australian gold fields at premium prices. California wheat farmers profited from gold rushes on 2 continents without touching a pan. The economic logic was inescapable. Gold mining required luck and labor. A miner invested time and physical effort for uncertain returns. Most days yielded little or nothing. Good days found enough gold to cover costs. Extraordinary days, the ones that fed the dream, happened rarely. Merchants and millers, by contrast, profited from every transaction regardless of whether miners found gold. When miners succeeded, they bought supplies and celebrated with expensive dinners and whiskey. When miners failed, they bought supplies on credit hoping the next claim would pay off. Either way, merchants captured value. The merchant class understood something fundamental that miners ignored. In a resource boom, scarcity isn't the resource. Scarcity is the infrastructure to extract, process, and supply the boom. Gold was abundant in California in 1849. What was scarce? Shovels, flour mills, transportation, storage, banking, credit. The merchants who controlled those inputs controlled the wealth. By 1860, California's agricultural sector generated approximately $50 million annually. Wheat accounted for perhaps $15 million. Flour milling added another $8 million in value. Vegetable farming, livestock, and other crops provided the remainder. Compare that to gold production in 1860, $45 million, down from the 1852 peak of $81 million. Agriculture was overtaking mining as California's economic engine, and agriculture was industrialized from the start. California never developed small family farms in the Jeffersonian ideal. It developed agribusiness. Large landowners operated mechanized farms employing wage labor. They integrated vertically, owning land, mills, storage, and distribution. They exported globally. They operated like corporations before the corporate form fully existed. The social structure reflected economic reality. California's richest men by 1860 weren't miners. They were merchants, millers, railroad builders, and land speculators. Sam Brannan, despite his later bankruptcy from alcoholism and a divorce settlement, accumulated and spent a fortune that miners could never imagine. Levi Strauss built a company that lasted 170 years. George Hearst invested mining wages into silver and copper claims and died worth $19 million. His son, William Randolph Hearst, built a media empire. None of them owed their fortunes to gold panning. They built businesses serving and supplying people who searched for gold. The cultural narrative obscured economic reality for 175 years. The gold rush mythology celebrates the lone prospector striking it rich. The 49er became an American archetype, the rugged individualist seeking fortune in California. Books, movies, and frontier mythology reinforced that image for generations. It was always a lie. The reality was mundane and mathematical. Resource extraction enriches infrastructure owners and supply chains, not laborers. That pattern repeated across every mineral boom in American history. The Colorado silver rush of the 1870s made fortunes for railroad builders and smelter operators. Montana copper mining enriched mine owners and equipment manufacturers. The oil booms of Texas and Oklahoma in the early 1900s created wealth for refiners, pipeline companies, and land speculators. The laborers who did the actual work earned wages. Sometimes good wages, but wages nonetheless. The ownership class captured the value. California's gold rush compressed that pattern into a decade and made it visible. Between 1848 and 1858, $550 million in gold came out of California soil. Following that gold through the economy reveals where wealth concentrated. Miners extracted it and immediately spent it on overpriced supplies. Merchants collected it and invested in land, mills, and infrastructure. Those investments generated rental income and appreciation. By 1870, California's richest families owned banks, railroads, agricultural land, and urban real estate. They controlled the state's economy. Very few came from the prospecting class. Most came from the merchant class who'd sold supplies during the rush. The flour mill arithmetic was particularly instructive. Building a steam-powered flour mill in Sacramento in 1854 cost approximately $50,000. The mill could process 100 barrels per day. At $27 per barrel selling price and $10 per barrel in wheat costs and labor, the mill generated $17 profit per barrel. Daily profit, $1,100. The mill paid for itself in 29 days. After that, it generated $620,500 in annual profit. One mill, 30 employees. More profit than 3,000 miners working full-time. The mill operated regardless of whether any specific miner found gold. It processed wheat grown by farmers who employed mechanized equipment to maximize acreage per worker. It sold flour to miners at whatever price the market would bear. It required capital, not luck. It required business acumen, not physical labor. And it generated returns that miners couldn't approach. By 1880, California wheat exports hit $190 million in total value since 1860. That's cumulative, not annual. But it dwarfed individual mining returns. A successful miner who worked 1850 through 1880 and averaged $400 annually in net profit earned $12,000 over 30 years. A flour mill owner who built in 1854 and operated until 1880 generated perhaps $15 million in cumulative profit. One mill owner earned what 1,150 successful miners earned combined. Most miners weren't successful. Most went home broke or died broke in California. The mill owner's family entered California's economic elite and stayed there for generations. The lesson was clear, but remained unlearned. Every subsequent resource boom, timber, copper, oil, uranium, rare earth minerals, followed the same pattern. The laborers who extracted resources earned wages or small royalties. The owners of extraction infrastructure and supply chains captured the value. The California gold rush demonstrated this principle perfectly, but American mythology focused on the prospector with a pen, not the merchant with a ledger. That mythology persisted because it sold better than arithmetic. The dream of striking it rich by finding gold in a stream resonated emotionally. The reality of building wealth through capital investment in supply infrastructure was boring. Nobody wrote dime novels about flour millers. But the flour millers got rich. By 1934, when the last significant placer mining ended in California, the state's total gold production stood at approximately 118 million troy ounces, worth roughly $2.4 billion at the fixed gold price. Over 86 years, that averaged $28 million annually. California agriculture by 1934 generated $750 million annually, 27 times gold production. The wheat industry, built during the gold rush, had expanded into fruits, vegetables, cotton, and livestock. The infrastructure developed to serve miners became infrastructure serving global markets. The capital accumulated by merchants financed the expansion. The gold rush ended. Agribusiness remained. The final accounting was brutal. Of the 300,000 people who rushed to California between 1848 and 1855 seeking gold, perhaps 40,000 achieved moderate success. They found enough gold to improve their circumstances, pay off debts, buy land elsewhere, establish businesses. Most of those successes came early, in 1848 and 1849, before competition intensified and surface gold disappeared. Another 40,000 earned enough to break even. They covered their costs but accumulated nothing. The remaining 220,000 lost money. They spent more traveling to California and purchasing supplies than they recovered in gold. Many died there. Disease, accidents, violence, and harsh conditions killed thousands. The merchants? Nearly all succeeded. Operating a general store in a gold rush town during 1849 to 1855 virtually guaranteed profit. The only question was how much. The worst merchant in Sacramento probably cleared $5,000 per year. The best made millions. The mill owners succeeded spectacularly. Every mill built in California between 1850 and 1860 that survived fires and floods generated enormous returns. The farmers who supplied wheat to those mills became California's landed gentry. The California gold rush wasn't about gold. It was about food, tools, transportation, credit, and land. The people who controlled those inputs controlled the wealth. The gold was just the bait that drew 300,000 laborers to California to build the infrastructure and markets that made merchants and millers rich. Sam Brannan understood this instantly. On May 12, 1848, when he ran through Portsmouth Square shouting about gold, he'd already bought the shovels. He knew the prospectors would make him wealthy while making themselves poor. He was right. The prospectors extracted $550 million in gold over the next decade. Brannan captured $6 million of it by selling them the tools. The flour mills captured another $100 million selling them bread. The prospectors kept the rest, minus their costs, which ate most of it. When the counting ended, California had 300 millionaires. Fewer than 5 made their money mining. The rest sold, processed, transported, or speculated. They built fortunes while prospectors built dreams. The Sacramento mills still stand as monuments, renovated into lofts and offices. The prospectors' claims reverted to forest and stream. History remembers the miners. The ledgers remember the millers, and the ledgers tell the true story of who struck it rich.